give a warm welcome, if everyone could please, to Dr. Doris Candelaria. And I'm going to give you a brief intro on who Dr. Doris is. Dr. Doris Candelaria received her PhD in Educational Leadership and Policy Policy Studies at the University of Denver. She received her Master's of Education in Teaching and Learning in Regis University, and her Bachelor's in Elementary Education from the University of Northern Colorado. She spent 28 years in public education as an elementary and middle school teacher, elementary and middle school principal, and central office administrator. Then in 2014, she was recognized as a Colorado National Distinguished Principal for her work at Sanchez International School, a former turnaround school. Dr. Candelaria is a clinical associate professor at the University of Denver. Her teaching agenda includes preparing the next generation of principals and courses in the master's and doctoral programs in educational leadership, influencing educational change for equity and social justice, and closing the opportunity gap through education are her professional passions. Other research interests include the Latinx narrative in education, school regeneration, turnaround leadership, parent and community engagement in schools, and intercultural development of leaders. We've got an expert in the field right here. So everyone, if we could please give her a really warm welcome. Dr. Doris Candelaria, the floor is yours.
All right, well, thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, let's try that. Hello, everyone. Good morning and happy Friday. Looking forward to sharing with you and meeting you all today. So this is, I think, a great opportunity to connect the ECHO work that you've been doing over this last series to the next ECHO work. So this is a great transition. When I saw that you'll be focusing on family and community engagement, I thought, oh, this will be a nice tee up for that. So here's my agenda for this morning. We're going to talk about connection, disconnection, and reconnection, community and belonging, and cultivating community through resilience building. And then hopefully we'll come back to what are some acts of resilience that we can all do to continue to build community. So let's start with connection, disconnection, and reconnection. How did we get here? How did we get to where we are right now? And we think about everything that's going on in the world, and it just has been, and I've seen this definitely in all of my work in schools lately, that, even though we're all connected as human beings, the whole notion of even 6 degrees of separation has been proven again and again. We're just 6 degrees or fewer social connections between one another. Yet right now, we're further away from one another than we've ever been. And so how did we get to this disconnection that we're experiencing right now in the world? And I've been using this term of this trifecta of social calamity. So we've had COVID-19 that is still continuing to rage. We have racial unrest, and we have political polarization happening in our country right now. And it's caused such a disruption in our natural ways of connecting as humans. And so how do we come back to ourselves? How do we come back to reconnection? So we first have to understand, well, how did we get to this disconnection? And so what we need to understand that is chaos theory. I love chaos theory. It actually is a new science theory that comes from the natural world. And here's what we know about chaos theory. It's unpredictable. Our interconnections get disrupted. Minute actions can blow up into massive disruptions. So you've seen that happen in your work or in schools, in your communities. When it erupts, it actually destroys the current structure. So that's what we're seeing happening right now in the world. When COVID-19 erupted, it destroyed everything that we knew about the current structure and how do we respond to a pandemic. It also creates the conditions for a new structure to emerge, which is pretty interesting. What I love about chaos theory is that you can take it as a metaphor to the natural world. And when we have mass destruction, what do humans do? they naturally band together. We've seen that happen in our country. When 9/11 happened, people were reaching out to one another. They were taking care of one another. When we've had massive hurricanes happen in our country, people don't look at their differences. They just look at what do we need to do to help and support one another. In nature, the system, when chaos theory happens, let's just say a hurricane hits the land, what happens is everything is completely disrupted and destroyed. But in nature, the natural world seeks to bring back balance. And so what the natural world does is it starts to grow immediately. You can see within days of a massive fire or a natural disaster that the natural earth begins to regrow within several days. And so what the connection is to us as humans is how do we find that natural reconnection that we need to come back to wholeness. So I want to share a little bit of research around belonging and coming back to our best selves and how might we go about that in our current situation. So many of you are probably really familiar with Brene Brown. I'm a huge fangirl for Brene Brown. She's a sociologist out of the University of Texas, and she has done a lot of work around vulnerability. This particular research that she did was around true belonging. And so what she was seeking is, she was feeling, this was in 2017 already, back in 2017, that she was feeling this unrest happening in our country. And she was really trying to understand, trying to make sense of what was happening, so much strife, so much polarization back in 2017 that has actually continued to grow. And so what she was trying to understand is what do people want? What are they trying to achieve? What are people really worried about right now? And so she's a grounded theorist, and what grounded theorists do is they study the natural world. They study what people are seeking to resolve. And so she went about conducting her research for true belonging, and this is what she found. People want to be part of something, to experience a real connection with others. People are feeling surrounded by an us versus them culture that creates feelings of spiritual disconnection. There's a diminishing sense of shared humanity. Now, I want to point out, when she was talking about spiritual disconnection, she wasn't really talking about in a religious sense. She was talking about a spiritual disconnection of humanity, of humanness. And so this is what people were seeking. And so as she does, as a grounded theorist, they gather all this information and then they look for themes. What are the big ideas that emerged as she tried to answer this question of what are people seeking? And this is what she found. People are hard to hate close up. You have to move in. Speak truth to BS, but be civil. Hold hands with strangers. Soft back, strong back, soft front, wild heart. So as she did her research, this is what she found. And people went, wait, what? What? What are you asking us to do? Like, we are so different from one another in our thinking, in our beliefs, in our political beliefs, in our religious beliefs. Wait. But what she said was, yes, when we lean in and really understand, or really try to understand what people are thinking, what people are feeling, that's when we really begin to engage around our humanity. And speaking truth to BS, that's a tough one, because as we all know, there's a lot of craziness going on out there. There's a lot of conspiracy theories. There's a lot of polarization happening in our communities and even across families over the last 2 years. So how can we speak truth, our truth, to what we believe is BS, but yet be civil? That civility has been missing. And how do we get back to that? And then holding hands with strangers. That's what we see when natural disasters happen, that people hold hands. But with COVID-19, we couldn't hold hands. And so that really prevented that human connection with one another. But what other ways could we hold hands metaphorically? with strangers. And strong back is standing in our values, but yet soft front, being open to hearing other people's ideas. And a wild heart is being willing to change and being willing to love and being willing to embrace humanity. So after she conducted this research, she thought, you know what, I'm going to talk to kids. So what did kids have to say about belonging? And this was pretty interesting. 8th graders said, belonging is being somewhere where you want to be and they want you. Fitting in is being somewhere you want to be, but they don't care one way or the other. Belonging is being accepted for you. Fitting in is being accepted for being like everyone else. If I get to be me, I belong. If I have to be like you, I have to fit in. So think about what conditions do we create in our community where true belonging can really happen? And what ways can we think about dismantling a fitting in culture? Just hold on to that thought. So how do we do this? How do we create communities of belonging? Number one, we have to create those conditions, like I just said, for constant, regular, and positive interactions between people. We found in the Zoom space that we can actually even create that online. It's what you've all created here in Echo. You have these constant, regular, positive interactions. We fill our cups in these spaces. We also need to engage over mutual concerns and care for one another. So what's happened in our current politicized climate, we're not engaging over mutual concerns. We're engaging over divisiveness. How do we flip that narrative and bring it back to what do we care about in our communities? How can we care for one another? And third, we need to identify commonalities and yet respect differences. So creating these conditions for constant, regular, and positive interactions between people, they include what I call the 4 R's. Recognition. What haven't we celebrated? What do we need to celebrate? In hard times, we still have to find joy and find opportunities for celebration. And what's missing? We've come away from, the different ceremonies and the rituals and the things that we do to recognize one another and to see one another. I love this word regeneration. I'm currently working on some research on regenerating schools and not turnaround schools, but regeneration invites the idea that we're creating something new, but we're not completely letting go of everything that we've had in the past. We bring that past with us and we regenerate and recreate and re-enliven and re-motivate and re-inspire. So this word has a lot of broadness to it that we could bring to thinking about creating these conditions. And then reconciliation. What needs healing? What harm has been done to our communities? What do we need to do to come back to one another and reconcile these past hurts? And how might we go about doing that? And then finally, reconnection. So when we're doing all of these things, that we keep coming back and we keep reconnecting. And what we do is we actually build a lot of energy. This reconnection that can happen in communities builds the will to want to see one another and to want to come back together. Engaging over mutual concerns. So here's just a little path that you all could think about. So starting with, as we think about what do we all care about, what do we want and need for our communities, we start with norms. And then it's important to engage across all generations in many forms and be sure to involve our youth. Our youth have a lot to say right now. And we want to make sure that their voice is included. We gather data. So what does everybody have to say? It's kind of like being like a grounded theorist, like Brene Brown. We gather all this data, and then we say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Let's create an action plan. We put the plan in place. Then we monitor and evaluate what's working, what's not working, what do we need to change? And then we revise. So I'm going to talk a little bit later about, this is called the double loop learning process, but this is just a way to engage over these mutual concerns. But I also want to talk about identifying commonalities and respect differences. So this is some of the work I do in developing intercultural mindset and intercultural way of being. And so this is called the Intercultural Development Continuum. And people are on this continuum. They actually do a survey that asks you questions about culture. And then you get results that tell you where you are on this continuum. There's no judgment, there's no shame. People are where they are on this continuum based on their life experiences. And so here's what we know about this. Currently, we have a lot of polarization when we think about intercultural differences. And when we talk about that, we're talking about any kind of difference. We're talking about gender, we're talking about race, ethnicity, ability, socioeconomic status. So any kind of difference that we can think about that influences our culture, because all of those identities have an impact on how we see the world and how we interact in the world. So with this current polarization, what actually minimization is the longest stage on this continuum, and we're leading toward this idea of being intercultural. But we have been conditioned, especially in the US, toward a minimization mindset, this idea of I don't see color, I don't see difference, we're all humans, we're all teachers, we're all school service workers, we're all principals, whatever that identity is, we're all moms, we're all dads, that we minimize the difference that a difference makes. And so this is important. We're talking about coming back to our true selves and building community, reconnecting, is identifying the commonalities and respecting the differences. So I wanted to show you this just to anchor our thoughts in being in this place of polarization. How do we start to move forward? And we move through these stages, and they can be situational. Excuse me, they can be situational, but as we move towards accepting and really comprehending difference, and then towards bridging across difference, we can come back to ourselves. So I could do a whole session on this particular continuum, but I think it anchors us in the importance of identity, but also in respecting differences. And then I'm going to connect this to communities in a little bit. So as we think about that piece coming back, well, then how do we recultivate? How do we bring forward this idea of resilience? And so this comes from resilience science. There's actually resilience theory out there that we can rely on around research that talks about in what ways can we really cultivate community. I love pictures and metaphors. So this having all of our roots underground. But then again, as I said, you know, when a big disruption happens, it's going to cut that plant off, but the roots are still there. We can still regrow. We can still make all these connections that we had before and grow a new and more vigorous community. These are 6 foundations of community resilience: people, systems thinking, adaptability, transformability, sustainability, and courage. So I'm going to move through these pretty quickly because I see I'm coming on to time. But I want to just talk about that community is the people inhabiting a particular place. It's defined by their interpersonal relationships, patterns, economic governance, and shared memories and aspirations. It can be a small group. This group echo is a community. It can be your school. It can be your town. It can be your neighbor. It can be your neighborhood, your families. So back to this element, people, it talks about identity. And coming back to that idea of identity, your values and your shared vision, but it's also your social capital. You have to have ownership, engagement, trust, and deep relationships. We've learned how to build community online, but as we come out of this space where we still have that, but yet we have opportunities to be together, how can we include these things in paying attention to people? So the metaphor of a table and setting the table, how are we inviting all those voices that are not heard to that table? As I said before, in that second step, how do we invite all these voices to really talk about what do we care about? What do we value? What's our identity? And it's not just about setting the table. Sometimes it's recreating the table. Sometimes it's building a new table. How do we ensure that we are inviting all of those voices that are traditionally not heard to this table of community? Systems thinking is really important. It's a discipline for seeing wholes. I think it's really important to think about how do we create a shared vision as a community. And we have to pay attention to what are all those mental models that we're running around with of what a community is, because we all have them. So how do we understand that when we bring people together? What's your idea of a community? That's your mental model. And this requires us to take on some personal mastery and to bring about some team learning. This one is, sorry that got all the wordiness on it. The two big ideas that, and you'll get this to look at later, that I really want to bring forward is, as a foundation of building community resilience, we have to have adaptability, but we have to be careful, because as we respond to change and learn from it, we need to operate with tight double feedback loops. What often we do is we try a new idea, and then when it doesn't work, we throw the whole thing out without looking at what are all the components that didn't make that work? And what are those minute changes or tweaks that we need to do before we come back to that cycle that I showed you earlier? So we can't get just stuck in the single feedback loop. We have to use a double. We have to keep coming back to it. And why this matters is that we're building this regenerative capacity. So when the plant gets wiped out, or the community, we can revigorate those roots to grow ourselves back stronger. But the caution here is, if the system can't learn and truly adapt, it will be forced to transform. And forced transformation is not fun. That's really hard when the community is forced to transform. So as community members, we can get in front of that, and we can support the community, and we can decide when we want to plan a transformation versus react to a forced transformation. When we plan the transformation, we recognize the needs, we create conditions, and we build our social capital. We tap into all of our resources. So in community building efforts, we think about sustainability, human, social, economic, and environmental. So we have thinking about, how do we improve our human capital? All of these sources: education, services, wellness, knowledge. How do we improve our social quality, our relationships, our shared ideas? We think about ourselves as a community, but also other communities. And we care about equity and social justice. The economic piece of it is improving the standard of living, well, not at the expense of social or natural capital. Environmental, improving human welfare through the protection of natural capital. This is some new science that's emerging. How do we not extract from our land, our water, our environment, our minerals, while improving human welfare? And finally, we need courage. We absolutely need courage to do this work, to confront the challenging issues of our time, and to take responsibility for our collective future. People are talking a lot around a new collective, a new way of being. But we've been so encompassed by fear and that trifecta of social calamity that we haven't been able to regenerate. We haven't been able to renew. So this is our opportunity to do that with courage. And here's just some ideas of courage and how it brings us back around to that first foundation of the 6 foundations, which is people. So the courage to work with other people and share in taking responsibility, courage to tackle the complex systemic issues we face, courage to learn from experience and adapt our thinking and our ways of being, the courage to accept uncertainty and make big transformations when necessary, and finally, the courage to commit to far-reaching and long-term resilience, because communities who have resilience, who built resilience, when a next big thing happens, a next big disruption, they can come back to that resilience. Those roots are stronger, they can bounce back quicker. And so that brings forward long-term resilience that's sustainable for generations to come. So that's my presentation. I know we're going to go into some breakout groups to talk about this.
Thank you so much, Doctora. We are so grateful for this. Everyone, let's show our appreciation. Thank you so much. that is an incredible topic for us to talk about, especially like you mentioned with COVID and everything we've been through. Building community has shown to be so important. I know that me talking with my wellness coordinators, that's something that every single district has been working on. So thank you. And we are so excited to hear your thoughts, what you all are thinking. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. There we go. And we are going to follow up with our breakout rooms. And what we're going to do is, as before, we're not going to take notes anymore. People have spoken. We are listening. Introduce yourself, please, whenever Andrea puts you in your groups, and let everybody know where you're logging in from, and identify someone who can facilitate the conversation. And our questions this week are as follow. So if you want to take a photo of this screen, if that's easiest, that's good. But Andrea's also going to put a link on the chat. Thank you, Andrea. And y'all can just click on that and it'll pop up. Yeah, so enjoy your conversations. We look forward to our discussion afterwards, and enjoy. Let's just kick it off. Let's get started. We would love to hear if you have any lingering thoughts, anything that your groups mentioned that you're really excited about. Feel free to write it on the chat, or we can even just talk about it out loud. And Doctora Candelaria is here, so we got the expert.
I'm willing to start us off because our group was talking about, and I know Doris, you have mentioned this too, so I think this could be a cool conversation, is we're talking about community generally and in the big sense, but also how does this apply to schools? And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, and maybe other people can add to that conversation.
Yes, absolutely applies to schools. I mean, there's a direct connection as we think about the example of true belonging versus fitting in. What does that look like for students? What does that look like for parents? What does that look like for both the teaching staff and non-certified staff, support staff? And thinking about building a community in schools, and how are you setting that table for invitation to all voices so that all voices are being heard, and connecting that to identity. Who are we as a school community? What are our values? What are our mutual concerns right now? Because of all the divisiveness happening over mask mandates or non-mask mandates, it has become so politicized. But how do we get down to what do we really care about? What do we really need for our children to feel safe so that they can learn? So there's an absolute connection there. And if you look at those 6 foundations, we're talking about the people, which includes identity and values. We're talking about the systems thinking, like what are all these systems that operate within our schools that we might need to consider? How are we adaptable? Are we adaptable enough that we have built resilience as a school community? Do you already have some resilience factors? I know that you've had previous presentations on resilience. And then, do you need to transform? Do you need to disrupt yourselves and purposefully enact a transformation? Or did all the chaos of what was happening force you to transform, and you're in the muck of sorting that out? And then sustainability is about what do we create for right now, and then what can we create for the future? So how can we create something that is regenerative, that it's not, oh, we're just going to fix the problem in front of us, but how do we create something for the future, for the next generation, for the person who takes your place, for the next group of leaders, students, families? And then finally, how do we enact that courage? And we have to come back to our humanity, connecting around our humanity. What do we have in common over what we have as differences? Recognizing differences and what a difference those differences make, but also connecting our humanity. So that's how, but I would tie it all together.
You know, Dr. Candelaria, I just now that you said the courage, that really brought some up for me. And that's like, where does that courage come from? How do I get that courage to stand up? I could only do so much in my day. I can only, or our team or whatever it is. And so that really stuck to me is the courage. That's part of it, is having that courage to be able to get your voice out there and, people hear what is needed. And that could be frightening.
Absolutely, Stella. Courage is not easy. I mean, that's that strong back, soft front, wild heart. And so I hear you. I've been there myself. I've been in a really, really difficult school situation many, many times where I needed to build courage. One strategy is to start with a small community. Find your allies, find your systems of support. Start small with that group, because you need people who have your back, but you also need people who, so that you can connect with. And if you're starting with that small group, that you have that system of support, you can help one another to lock arms around courage and lock arms around the things that you desire for your community. And you can have different values, you can have different beliefs, but you can still lock arms and support one another.
Thank you.
I'm going to share what I took on after Ben gave us that gratitude challenge of 21 days. He said he was going to do it. And the way just like Robin, you said that, it makes you aware. I'm a counselor, but still, I got to take care of my mental health. We all lapse on that, no matter how much knowledge we have. We don't practice it as much as we need to. And so I numbered 1 to 21 on a page so I would keep myself on track. And I did notice that positive effect that it had cumulatively. And so I'm going to be sharing it with our staff on Monday. With Andrea, you shared the Thankful Thursday deal. We're going to do that for a month. And I just know that's going to have a positive community building effect on the staff. We're all feeling pretty worn out these days, but if we start sharing just those things we're grateful for, that, like you were saying, Dr. Candelaria, that just builds community. We are all grateful for pretty much the same things when you think about it.
I was just going to say, that is a wonderful place to start. You're setting this community table of gratitude. How beautiful is that? And that creates energy. And so when people start to think about what they're grateful for and they start to connect over gratefulness, that actually is a regenerative act. That's an act of resilience. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Stephanie, I don't know if you are able to share about what you did at Creed around the gratitude, but this is a subtle invitation to share. If she can't, I could just share what I heard. Maybe it's the mute button's hard to find. At Creed, they did something amazing. After that gratitude session we had, they did their own gratitude board, and it ended up being a community builder. Keith, I don't know if you've experienced it, but so it was just really cool to see how some of these things are overlapping. So to your point, Doris, on how the things we're grateful for are often shared. So that was a cool connection for me to see.
Yeah, I did make it down the hallway and got to peek at it a little bit. Thank you to you guys, the Crush team, the Echo series. I think it's making a difference slowly but surely. But yeah, we've gone through the ringer for the last 19 months, and we need to get out of it.
I was just going to say, sorry, I'm talking too much, but I was noticing one thing in your 4R words, that they all started with re. And I just feel like that's something that I keep thinking about. It's like, it's not something that we are learning brand new. It's a remembering of things that we are or that we've done. And I feel like that's really empowering. I don't know if anybody has thoughts on that, but.
It's just like those roots underground. They're there. The memory is there. Our memory of community is there. And it just needs a little watering, a little sunshine, a little love. I'd love to hear if anyone had any thoughts on that.
There is a comment on the chat. Kendra is sharing about how their group talked about continuing to support staff and students by having fun, not to dwell on the negative or the daily happenings that make everyone anxious. Outside activities are great.
It's another great way to regenerate. Start with fun and just having fun together. Have we forgotten how to do that? Yeah.
And that is so interesting that you asked that question, because we just had a presentation about including fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like Ben saying everything is connecting, and it's awesome to see how it all works together. Anyone else making these connections?
I was going to say another thing, just keep talking, Carla. But Doris, you mentioned this too, and I feel like this is so important. Our kids, we all have the opportunity being in schools to connect with these amazing humans who, and hearing from them what they think, I think is another way to just, I don't know, their wisdom can be helpful in these times, I think.
All right. I also had a thought. One of your titles in the slides had among the lines of, I don't remember the exact wording, but the message that stuck with me was to see where everybody's at, and then accepting that and moving from there. So I think that's something that I'm really going to take away from today that I'll be thinking about. Yeah. I think someone else commented on the chat. I'm going to open the space for one more question or one more thought after I read this. So let it sink in, let it brew. Michelle shared that she shared an article about why laughter is so important for our mental, emotional, and physical health. Yeah. And honestly, if we're not feeling in that positive space, I feel like everything we talked about today, building community, can also be affected. Just my thoughts. All right. Anybody else? We have one more time for one more question. No. It doesn't have to be fully developed thought. We'll take it. All right.
Where is more of your work? Where could we find more of your work? Like specifically, like looking at that, that index that you had, that rating, that little scale that went up about where we intercultural, where we were on including people's voices.
Oh, thank you, Holly, for asking that question. You can, I'll make sure that you all get my email address on the intercultural development work. You could reach out to me directly, and we could chat about if that was something that you would like to do in your community, or even just for yourself. So if you take the IDI, you actually get a report back that gives you information about where you are on the continuum, and then it gives you a plan. So how do you work to get more interculturally developed? And so that all comes as part of that. I conduct IDI debriefs for people if they were interested in that. So you could just reach out to me directly. I've done them in whole schools, communities, systems, organizations. So yeah, absolutely. Reach out to me directly. I'll put my email in there. I'm sure it'll be on the notes as well.
That's right. We'll be sharing the PowerPoint, all this information, a recording, resources. So it'll go tagged along with it. Thank you, Martin. That was excellent. That's a really good way for us to kind of wrap up our presentation. Dr. Doris Candelaria, again, thank you so much. If everyone could join me thanking her. This was outstanding. What a way for us to end our didactics. This is amazing.
For more information about Project Echo and upcoming Echoes with the University of Denver, please visit mortgage.du.edu/echo or follow us on Twitter at echo_du_MCE. Thanks for watching.